Welcome back to Fuzzy Logic, the podcast that breaks down the incentive structures in our society to understand who benefits from the status quo and what's at stake for the future. I'm Matt Haller.
And I'm Chris Michaud.
On this week's show, we'll be diving into the incentives around loyalty programs. Many of us belong to them, but outside of thinking they're a good idea, what do they really provide for us? And who ultimately benefits more, the consumer or the company? So I guess, Chris, what are some of your favorite loyalty programs that you've been a part of?
I'll give you two current ones and one that I missed that doesn't exist anymore. Overall, Starbucks rewards apps is probably the best one I've seen just because it's pretty straightforward. It's easy to use and the star bonus points are targeted towards what you do. So it's not like they're forcing you to try different things you don't want to do. So that's one I like. Chase Ultimate Rewards is another one. And the reason for that is because I can spend those points on whatever I want. So if I want to book airline tickets, I can. If I want to book travel, I can. The one I missed that no longer exists, and you'll understand why afterwards. So when I was in college, that was the tail end of TWA being in business. And at the time, their rewards program, which was called Aviators Club, I think, you could redeem 2-for-1 first class tickets on award tickets. So if you booked an award ticket, so a free ticket, they gave you another free ticket in first class, which obviously not sustainable. And that's why they're not in business anymore, but it was good while the getting was good.
The one that I think is pretty good if you can get to the top echelon is Southwest has their companion pass, where if you are top of the top, every time you fly, you can designate someone else to fly with you. And that is to your like buy one, get one free deal. If you spend that kind of money on Southwest Airlines and you fly a lot, that can add up pretty quickly. But then going back to some of our incentive programs of yesteryear, I genuinely missed the Starwood Preferred Guest program, and all of you management consultants out there are just sighing in nostalgia with me because usually with these hotel programs, they make you just have nights, number of nights that you stay. That's the thing that they anchor on. But SPG also tried to anchor on number of stays. So you could actually game the system. And instead of getting to your platinum on 50 nights a year, you could get there on 10 stays by just booking nights back to back. It was amazing. It was a different time. And then Marriott came and bought it, and bon voyage.
Bon void, I think is the term some management consultants use for that. Yeah, no, those are all good ones.
But Chris, these are some of the ones that we've talked about today, but where did these loyalty programs ultimately get their start?
Yeah, it's interesting. You would think this is a new phenomenon, but the reality is it started all the way back in the George Washington administration. In 1793, there was an American merchant who came up with this pioneered idea of every time you came back to the store, you got these like copper coins, and then you could take these coins to redeem merchandise in the store. And this essentially established the spend and get type of loyalty programs. Buy stuff from me, I'll give you a reward for it. That became more sophisticated, call it end of the 19th century. There was a company called S&H who made green stamps. This program ran for about 100 years. And basically, if you went to supermarkets, gas stations, and they all participated in the program, you got these little stamps, you filled them up in books, and you got a catalog where you could buy anything you wanted, essentially. So if you think about today, we talked about Chase Ultimate Rewards or some of the places where you can use multiple points. That was essentially the analog version of that. So it was kind of a nice idea. The modern idea of our loyalty programs debuted really in the early 1980s, and that's the American Advantage program. Everyone talks about it. It's a business case. And why airlines thought about this is airlines became deregulated, so they had to actually compete. Prior to deregulation, prices were set by the government, regardless of who you flew. So American came up with this really novel idea that the more you fly with me, I give you these miles, which are essentially currency that you can use to redeem for flights. And that just exploded into everything that we know about today in terms of modern loyalty. The airlines really started the modern loyalty program as we know it, and then credit cards laid in with partnerships. So it's very lucrative revenue for airlines and other hotel chains and other organizations to partner with credit card companies to share that revenue. So that's the modern kind of soup to nuts 3-minute history of loyalty.
So, Chris, as this is an incentive podcast, what do you think are some of the incentives that companies are trying to put in place, and what behaviors are they trying to get from their consumers? And then also vice versa, what's the expectation that a consumer has for this loyalty program?
Until very recently, the idea was the more I interacted with you, the more I got rewarded for it. Airlines. So go back to that, right? I flew more miles. As a consumer, I may have taken, and people did this, if it was 2,000 miles to the next tier status, they would fly across the country for the day and fly back. That's gone away now and it's more dollar-based. So I think what you're seeing in terms of consumers reacting to that is the credit cards and other things that allow you to spend, dining, shopping. There's all ways you can double and triple stack those opportunities. So I think people are moving more towards that direction. From the company side, that's getting a little more difficult because there's so many programs now. So trying to figure out which ones make the most sense for you takes a lot more homework homework, and companies need to be able to better target those people, as opposed to before it was, I'll blanket the program and I'll treat all customers equally. You've seen that strata disappear too. Amex Centurion card, great example of that.
I'm glad you brought up the Centurion card as an example, because one of the other trends that we've started to see over the last 20, 25 years is both an intermingling of credit card rewards and travel companies. You're thinking your branded credit cards for all your airlines or hotel chains, etc. And the recognition that these incentive programs have to stand on their own financially. And so creating a different revenue stream so that ultimately those free flights that you're getting, your free nights, aren't actually being paid for by the company. They're being paid for by the credit card processing company.
There's no better lesson to this than when United went bankrupt. So United in the early 2000s went bankrupt after 9/11. Basically, Mileage Plus was worth more than the airline because of the financial incentives from the credit card companies and everything. So the next time you think about, oh, is that a loyalty program meant to reward me? Yes, it is. But it is very financially lucrative, and in some cases worth more than the underlying assets of the company that the loyalty program is attached to.
Yeah, I mean, I think about the example with Delta Airlines recently, where for this year, they changed their program tiering to be based almost exclusively off of dollar spend. And so as a result, in theory, you could spend money on air travel. But the other avenue that people realized was I could spend no money on air travel, just put money on my Delta credit card, and then be able to get the same benefit as if I were an actual frequent flyer. And I wonder what that does to change the behavioral incentives and what that says for our broader travel industry as a whole.
I think people are going to get much more savvy. And what creates the demand for single loyalty, I think, is more cross-functional loyalty, where programs like Chase, Capital One, et cetera, have a real opportunity to capitalize on, I'm going to fly who I want to fly. I'm going to stay where I want to stay because I can still get that same sort of benefit. So I think some of the single, like called vertical, are going to have to try a lot harder to get people to do that other than just their credit card.
And with that, I think you touched on the fact that it's also creating a more complex environment. It's not just the program itself that's getting more complex. It's that I'm creating these multi-layered or multifaceted partnerships with different companies that is ultimately making the ask of the consumer, the clarity that the consumer needs to know that this is what I need to do in order to maximize my benefit and my reward from this thing, becomes much cloudier, much harder to really discern. And I think that's a good place for us to pause and take a quick break, because when we come back, we're going to talk to Albert Hsieh, the CEO and founder of a company that helps consumers understand these incentive programs and maximize the value of their loyalty reward points. Stay with us.
Calling all B2B sales executives. Ready to elevate your sales game? Meet Compose Comp, your partner in sales incentive excellence. Our tailored solutions blend expert design with tech innovation, ensuring your reps have the confidence to close deals. Take the first step to sales success. Visit composecomp.com and schedule your consultation now.
Welcome back to Fuzzy Logic. Our first guest is Albert Hsieh, a marketing pro who utilized the skills he built at companies like Westfield, ExoJet, and JetBlue to found Foxtrot Dash, a fintech venture that gives consumers over 30,000 ways to redeem their loyalty rewards points. Thank you so much for joining us, Albert.
Thanks for having me, Matt. Thanks for having me, Chris. Excited to be here.
So, Albert, Chris and I were just getting up to speed on where loyalty programs got their start, but we'd be remiss to not acknowledge that the pandemic really uprooted our lives and changed the way that we think. Have you seen a shift in how consumers are engaging with loyalty programs post-pandemic, and what are some of the trends that you've noticed in your work?
The shift in the way that consumers view loyalty programs, I would say, began before the pandemic. Loyalty programs, when you look at its inception in the 80s with American Airlines, I would say it's still just as complicated and more confusing than ever before. And I would say for there to be a shift in viewpoint, there has to be a starting point. And I do feel that consumers still today are struggling to understand the basics of loyalty programs. So the real change in how consumers should view loyalty programs today is really the construct. Loyalty programs today really value and have prioritized spend over actual flying and hotel stays. But overall, I think the pandemic has really motivated more people to use the reward points, really treat them as an asset. I just hope that people really kind of treat their points like cash. And that's really the basis of Foxtrot Dash and really my own personal philosophies of how we've created our business today.
With the proliferation of so many loyalty programs out there, do you see consumers not taking full advantage of these rewards?
Yeah. The challenge for consumers is that no two programs are created equal. There's variables in valuations, terms and conditions are changing every year. The sort of barometer for status is also changing. So how does a consumer really get smart around that? They can't. It's just unrealistic. I would say the recommendation is simply just to stay loyal to one or two programs. There's no need to diversify your portfolio, if you will. I would say choose your loyalty based on your geographical location and then ultimately your goals and backtrack into it. So if you're looking to go to the Maldives, you're likely going to want to fly maybe Emirates, Qatar, or you can fly one of the European carriers, maybe Singapore Airlines. So if you have your goals and travel goals in mind, then you can figure out your loyalty programs based on that. And so our program, Foxtrot Dash, being a travel rewards marketplace, really helps you prioritize that. What is your travel goal? And if you're aspiring to fly Singapore business class, great. Then you want to get a Chase card, transfer those points into Singapore Airlines, and then ultimately get into Singapore Airlines. So we try to really simplify in the sense of your aspirations.
Inflation in the points world also has been a big topic as more and more people join these programs, more and more people accumulate points, more and more people are holding on to their points such that it costs more to just redeem them. How do you get around that? And what are some tactics that you think that the average consumer can use in order to stay ahead of the market?
I'm so glad you bring that up, Matt, because you're right. Loyalty programs are losing a lot of value every day. And that's because loyalty programs are getting smarter and more complicated. They're making it more difficult to redeem your reward points. Now it's about Loyalty 3.0, which is tied to revenue in dollars. I would say the best recommendation is now you have to think in terms of seasonality. High season is going to be more expensive than low season. And so redeeming your points during peak summer, high holiday travel time, you're going to be spending more points. So if you have flexibility, you will have and gain more value out of it. If you're someone who likes to plan a year in advance, you're going to get a lot of access to great award availability. So I think before, whereas reward points were the same, now it's really going to be fluctuating based on seasonality, as we've basically seen with cash fares.
On the flip side of that, have companies been inclined to collaborate with you, or do you think there's an incentive for them to put the onus more so on consumers to navigate that rewards process, given it helps them maintain their vertical loyalty?
I want to make sure I speak on both sides because we want to be advocates for the consumer as well as these loyalty programs. And we just want harmony. We want to have a great relationship on all sides and this really positive kind of feedback loop, right? When consumers have a great rewards experience, they're going to be more loyal. They're going to open up their wallet more and they're going to stay loyal, right? Loyalty programs are ultimately a commercial and marketing program to reduce your advertising costs, right? It's more expensive for me to attract a new customer than to keep an existing one. And so how do you add more value and create more fun out of it? And I think that begins with more transparency, giving access to more award availability. For our program, we've definitely talked to some pretty large companies, both locally as well as abroad. And there's definitely interest in partnering and understanding how to expand their ecosystem, right? We definitely want to be more than just a travel rewards marketplace, but a true rewards marketplace across all verticals. I'll give you a stat here, and this is why we're solving this, is there's about 110 billion worth of reward points that go unused every single year. So if that's an indication of not only points hoarding, as you alluded to, Matt, people are nervous, people don't want to make a mistake, they don't want to lose value. They spent a lot of time saving those reward points. They should have a great experience using it. I think that loyalty programs can benefit from more services like ours as an extension. And I'm excited for the future. I think there's a lot that we can do here together, not just with technology, but really thinking about loyalty, what 3.0 means.
Albert, you've done a really good job of laying out for us what that Loyalty 3.0 future looks like. We really appreciate you stopping by the podcast, sharing your perspectives on the future about this whole travel world that is indeed getting only more complex and more confusing.
Thank you so much, Matt and Chris. I appreciate you having me on the podcast. If you're looking for a tool like Foxtrot Dash, I would say please check out the website. It's a really great database and allows you to search up over 30,000 different ways to use your reward points. There's definitely a lot of inspiration there. So definitely check it out. And if anyone here has any questions too, I'd be reached on Instagram at JetAlbert, where I share a lot of my own personal travels too. So thank you so much for having me.
When we're back, we'll be chatting with Noel Beavis, an expert in commercial strategy and management. Stay with us. Welcome back to Fuzzy Logic. Our second guest is Noel Beavis, a seasoned executive who spent over 25 years at Flybe, one of Europe's largest regional carriers. Currently, he's leading the delivery of hard and soft facility management services for the Defense Academy of the United Kingdom. Welcome, Noel.
Hey, Matt. Hi, Chris. Good to be with you.
Noel, you bring unique perspectives thinking about Flybe as they evolved from essentially when you started a full service carrier to more of a lower cost model. How did you guys think about that change and what impact did it have on loyalty overall?
Back when I joined Flybe, we were a full service carrier, as you said. We had a full separate business class cabin on our aircraft doing domestic regional operations within the UK mainly. We had a very limited loyalty scheme back then in the late 90s, like most airlines. I think as loyalty grew and as the business started to compete with more low cost airlines, we needed an edge. And that's where loyalty came in, trying to develop a scheme that wasn't prohibitively expensive, but still allowed us the opportunity to leverage loyalty from our customers.
I think most of us think of a loyalty program as, okay, I fly a lot or I do that and then I get all this free stuff. But being on the commercial side of the business, you saw there was a cost to that. So how did you guys manage the commercials of an aviation business, which obviously capitally intensive, very expensive, low margins, but also spending the right dollars on loyalty? How did you guys think about that?
From a regional point of view in Europe, our loyalty really never extended much beyond fly a certain number of times with us, get a free ticket. We never really got to the stage that the big mainline carriers got to, where you're seeing their loyalty business in some respects making up a significant chunk of their revenue.
I'm glad you brought up other airlines and other carriers because a lot of them do have their own loyalty programs of various levels of complexity. Where do you think that these rewards programs perform well? And what do you think are the things that they need to do better to deliver?
So I think the problem, I guess, is loyalty is expensive, right? So if you're a carrier, then you're constantly looking at ways of effectively offering loyalty, but at the same time taking some of those perks away from those people who've earned most of it, because those are your expensive customers. So it's a really delicate balance for airlines to manage and try and entice you with something that they call as revolutionary, but is actual fact taking away something that you're entitled to or that you have been entitled to. And that's the really difficult things. I think for any loyalty program to do is to shape itself in view of the customers coming, as well as serving those that have gone before that have earned what they believe a decent amount of loyalty that they should be able to burn with your offer.
So are you saying that like with this loyalty program, we're trying to create these little micro incentives, but the way that this actually plays out is we're taking from some groups of our passengers in order to reward or make another group of passengers seem more superior to the carriers. Is that fair?
I think to a certain extent it is, Matt. I think, for example, none of us would have said 20 years ago that we would ever consider crossing the Atlantic with a ticket that didn't at least include a bag. Now that is part of the course. I think the pandemic has taught us that we want to treat ourselves a little bit as well. So people are willing to spend that little bit more to have that bit more comfort on board.
Noel, do you see that there's almost like a divergent, almost two different classes of air traveler where you have your loyalty traveler who is willing to pay more for a ticket, wants to fly that premium seat, and might stick to an airline because, and I'll raise my hand for this, because I know that if I get status, I can fly that premium seat every time. It's like a nice little perk. Versus the group of people that say loyalty is actually less important to me because the bottom line cost is more important. And so I'll just fly whatever the cheapest carrier is. And how does that factor into airlines thinking through their relationships with their customers?
I think irrespective of loyalty, we have those carriers we prefer to fly and those that we choose not to. I think some of us will just automatically stick with that. I think that there will be those that do look at price. But to be fair, if you're looking at sort of the bottom end of the market in economy, it's all pretty much of a muchness. There isn't a great deal of difference. And even the low-cost long-haul can't compete with some of the mainline carriers across the Atlantic. So you're not going to find a significantly cheaper ticket elsewhere. So it really comes down to how those carriers differentiate those more premium cabins, whether it be Y Plus or it's a business. How do they differentiate and how do they offer? And you're already seeing some of the US carriers start to offer a little bit more privacy in the seating. That's going to be coming probably soon. That's the next evolution. How do we trade people up? And now that they've bought this cabin, keep them buying this cabin as we move forward.
What do you think that loyalty is going to look like 5 years from now for both consumers and businesses?
I think that what we're going to see is a slow degradation on what's offered to the consumer. So I think, the consumer will progressively get worse and worse. But I think that's the nature of loyalty. you're going to have to spend more, and as a percentage, it's going to go down. You've already seen EasyJet sort of go into somewhere in the UK like London Gatwick, which 10 years ago it would never have gone in there. It was way too expensive an airport to operate from. There's now the CEO making noises about trying to get into Heathrow. As soon as they start going in there and simply becoming one of the other big mainline carriers, they're going to have to invest in loyalty, because that's going to be the real difference between them and a British Airways or a Lufthansa or an Air France. So I think you're going to see some of the low-cost carriers invest in loyalty in a bit more. And I think that's just going to be because of the market development.
Really appreciate you taking the time to stop by, Noel. Fascinating conversation. And we really enjoyed your time here at Fuzzy Logic.
Great to be with you guys. Thanks very much indeed.
We're going to take a quick break, then come back and talk about our predictions for the future. We'll be right back.
Hey B2B sales pros, want to maximize your team's performance? Discover Compose Comp, your key to optimize sales incentives. We blend expertise and technology to give your reps the edge they need to close deals. Don't settle for ordinary. Visit composecomp.com and unlock your team's full potential today.
Welcome back to Fuzzy Logic. Now it's time for some predictions. What do you think, Chris? We've learned a lot from our guests today about customer loyalty programs, but what do you think are some of the key trends and takeaways we've learned today?
I think both guests provided some interesting perspectives, but they both aligned around one thing, which is loyalty programs are going to continue to be more complex and focused more around spend and profitability. Before, I think loyalty was viewed as a frequency metric, and both of them agreed and have seen that spend and profitability are going to triumph all those.
Yeah, I think hearing that, it makes me think about the movie from 2009, Up in the Air, with Anna Kendrick and George Clooney, where they're flying around the country. And George Clooney is teaching Anna Kendrick about all these loyalty programs, how to travel. And there's a scene where it's like, oh, he flew 75 times in a year, 100 flights, some crazy number. And there's this moment when you're like, wow, I really respect the hard work that comes with that. And I think that in America, we're cool with giving people status if they're like, wow, they really earned it. They worked it. They put the effort in. They flew all those flights. Yeah, good for you. That person was on a plane for 6 months. I don't want to do that. So yeah, you take that first class seat. But you know what we really hate in America? We hate rich people who cut the line. Right? Think about like a fast pass at Disneyland. Every time you're in line and you see somebody pass you, you're like, oh, screw that person. And yeah, they paid for the ticket, but we don't appreciate that because it's like you just skirted the line because of your money. That's where I think the loyalty programs are at risk, because if you break the connection between the behavior that you're asking from somebody and just saying it's about money, which to be fair, it's a business, it's about money. When you say that's all that matters, then what you're essentially saying, what you're effectively saying is that the only thing we care about is rich people who can pay for these tickets.
I offered to pay for your fast pass, but you told me no. So I had to walk past you multiple times and wait in line. But joking aside, you bring up a good point, which is if money is the pure loyalty metric, one would have to say it's not a loyalty program anymore. It's really a revenue program. And that's okay. That's an option. But you have to expect and say, okay, as a consumer, I'm aware of that. We know that contractual obligation. If I go back to our housing episode, like why people stop paying their mortgage because, hey, that trust is broken. I would argue probably for some folks who have been loyal to these companies. And frankly, they've also made them money. It's not like they're loss leaders, right? They might not have made them as much money, but now thinking about that and saying, okay, why should I give you any more of that money if Matt can charge it all on his credit card for his small business and suddenly he has better status than I am and I've been dealing with flying with you every week and spending delayed flights in Detroit and that kind of thing. So there is that push and pull and balance, and I think we're still learning the ins and outs of how that shake.
One of the things we heard from Noel and Albert is that the more successful a loyalty program is, the less actual loyalty incentives exist in that program. Because even though you're adding more people to the pool and it's good for the company, for the individual traveler, person who's actually consuming that program, there are more points that exist. There's going to be inflation of those asset classes. There's that $110 billion of unused points that exist every year. What that ultimately means is that the more people who are loyal to one program, the less valuable that program is to any one of those individual people.
Yeah, you heard both guests use the term earn and burn, right? And I think that's for our podcast listeners, I think that's an important point to think about. If you're the person where you log in and you're sitting on 500,000 American Advantage miles right now, that currency is devaluing by the day. Ditto for Marriott and any of the other big programs. So the idea of earning and using them as quickly as you can, I think both guests said, hey, if you're going to remain loyal to one particular brand, you better operate under that model if you want to get the maximum value out of the quote loyalty program.
And have a plan, right? That because the economics of these points and the routes and even some cases the companies are changing by the day, it's important to say, here's the things that I want to do this year. These are the places that I want to go and work backwards, because as these programs are becoming more complex, there are secret ways around through multiple partnerships and multiple different programs in order to get an affordable outcome that you were looking for. But you've got to put in the work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the other things the guest brought up, just pushing it back up to the what does loyalty mean? What I got out of them is that loyalty is complex. Loyalty requires a lot of work, and loyalty is going to require a lot of spend if you want to be involved in that game going forward. Now, Albert may have an interesting idea of how he's balancing the arbitrage of getting the best out of cross-functional programs. And I think that as we think about the future, I think more savvy consumers are going to try to take advantage of those types of platforms that help them maximize not only their spend, but putting it in the right places, which may or may not be loyal in the way that the actual companies themselves want to view it.
Yeah, I mean, especially as you have the tiers for higher levels of status going up and the amount of programs that you have to your availability going down, the incentive to shop around and play one off of each other really disappears pretty quickly unless you've got that high level of status at the top. Otherwise, it's find what works for you based on where you live and what you like, double down and understand how those programs work, and partner with companies who can help make sure that you get the true value out of the points that you have.
Yeah, I think to take a little parody from the notorious BIG, more loyalty, more problems, right? Going forward, I think it's something we're going to have to think about as we make our bets in the loyalty program.
On that note, Chris, this episode was juicy, and I think we can have you read us out.
All right, excellent. Thanks so much for tuning into this week's episode of Fuzzy Logic. Fuzzy Logic is produced by Mitch Rissmiller. New episodes drop Wednesdays wherever you get your podcasts. See you all next week.